So the first of two lectures for this week is on Peirce's Fixation of Belief. And the second lecture is going to be on Peirce's second paper in the 1877-1878 series called How to Make Our Ideas Clear. And these are considered two of the founding articles of pragmatism, and they're extraordinarily important. Their importance really cannot be overstated. So I want to go through both of these articles today with you, and I want to start with the Fixation of Belief, which was written in 1877 by Peirce. And this is an article where Peirce introduces this doubt belief matrix of inquiry, which is very important for Peirce and also becomes important for Dewey. It's also one where he describes logic as a kind of theory of inquiry, one that's experientially and experimentally controlled. And it's also the first of 6 papers that he lays out in what's called the Illustrations of the Logic of Science series. And this is a series of which we're going to read just the first 2 papers, the Fixation and How to Make Our Ideas Clear. So in the lecture today, what I'm going to talk about in part 1 is the development of the sources of knowledge as Peirce sees it, the connection between habit and logic, the starting point of Peirce, like where is he coming from? We talked about Descartes and the sort of Cartesian method of hyperbolic doubt, and I want to give a different account here of Peirce because it is very different. This is an account where he's going to lay out the difference between what it means to doubt and what it means to have a belief, what it means to do inquiry, and what he calls, or actually what I call, the matrix of doubt and belief. And these are all part of the Fixation paper. The second part of the lecture today on fixation is going to talk about the methods of belief. And he famously describes 4 different methods of belief, and he rejects 3 of them and keeps the 4th one. And he gives reasons why the first 3 are unacceptable or bound to fail. And he gives reasons why the 4th one, which he calls the method of science, is superior and the one that should be kept. And it has essentially been named the pragmatic method for quite a long time. So that's the intention of the lectures on fixation. So let's get going with part 1. So in part 1, Peirce describes sort of the development of the sources of knowledge. He goes back and he talks historically about the medieval schoolmen, the medieval philosophers, where in that period knowledge ultimately traced back to authority, typically church authority. So that would be the source of truth and falsity. He discusses the Bacons, both Roger Bacon and the later and more important Francis Bacon, who developed, I guess you might say, early experimental or early empirical methods. The notion that knowledge does trace back to experience. They had a crude or rather, Francis had a crude notion of the scientific method, which at least included experience, experiment, and verification. Much to improve on there, but an early, a precursor to the scientific method. He also talks about the early scientists. He talks about Kepler, he talks about Lavoisier, he talks about Darwin. These were all figures who were dissatisfied with the methods that they had inherited or were taught. Kepler was dissatisfied with deductive astronomy, and Lavoisier put forward a pretty vigorous approach towards hypothesizing, testing, by manipulating real things, testing again, and then publishing results. A very important development there. Darwin applied the methods of mathematics, particularly probability, to nature, and his concern was with general laws rather than individuals, populations in the long run. What Peirce sees in all of these scientists is a general trend that reasoning becomes fact-based, reasoning utilizes arguments which depend on the factual truth of the premises. Whether the conclusion follows from the premises is also extraordinarily important. This is also an article in which Peirce discusses Descartes' criterion of truth, which he rejects. Clear and distinct ideas as a criterion is rejected by Peirce, and he says in the article, "It is not in the least the question whether when the premises are accepted by the mind, we feel an impulse to accept the conclusion also." So Peirce is saying that we really need to take account of the role of habit in reasoning. Habit leads the mind from premises to conclusion, not logical necessity. Habits are good if they produce lots of true conclusions over time. So, for example, the conclusion of concluding that there is a fire or a hot source of some kind whenever smoke is present is a good one because it turns out to be true so often. We acquire the habit of concluding fire from the premise of smoke, and that habit guides our thinking in the future. So given all the doubt that we saw in Descartes about his starting point, let's consider Peirce's starting point. Now some might wonder about the following. How can we know anything is believable, that one could ever escape from doubt? Right? This was the question that Descartes poses and that every freshman class in philosophy poses. We wonder, do other people really exist? Are there other minds? Is there an external world? Is there even a common way of thinking? Is there a single logic that we can agree upon? The answer that Peirce gives is that I can't tolerate this kind of theoretical starting point. It is just not realistic. It is not where we start. So Peirce says that we actually start out in philosophy with a number of indispensable assumptions. And this is a quote from Peirce. He says, "It is implied, for instance, that there are such states of mind as doubt and belief, and that a passage from one to the other is possible, the object of thought remaining the same, and this transition is subject to some rules, which all minds alike are bound by. As these are facts which we must already know before we can have any clear conception of reasoning at all, it cannot be supposed to be any longer of much interest to inquire into their truth or falsity." Okay. So Peirce goes on from here to discuss some of the differences between a doubt and a belief. These are sort of, maybe you might say, phenomenological differences between doubt and belief, which he's going to go ahead and describe. So what are the differences between a doubt and a belief for Peirce? Well, they feel different. They're practically or consequentially different, right? Beliefs guide us towards desires. Beliefs shape our actions. Doubt doesn't do these things. He says the feeling of believing is a more or less sure indication of there being established in our nature some habit which will determine our actions. Doubt never has such an effect, right? So there are different states of mind, right? That's the third thing. Doubt is like an irritation. It stimulates a struggle to escape it, right? Through inquiry towards belief. Doubt activates inquiry, right? Belief is not a state of irritation. It's a state of contentment, of satisfaction. Belief disposes us towards action, but it doesn't initiate action. A belief is a disposition to act in a certain way. So having defined doubt and belief, Peirce is in a position now to offer a working definition of inquiry. He says, the irritation of doubt causes a struggle to attain a state of belief. I shall term this struggle inquiry, though it must be admitted this is sometimes a not very apt designation. Notice that this version of inquiry that Peirce is giving is explicitly and intentionally anti-Cartesian. He says, hence the sole object of inquiry is the settlement of opinion. We may fancy that this is not enough for us, and we may seek not merely an opinion, but a true opinion. But put this fancy to the test, and it proves groundless, for as soon as a firm belief is reached, we are entirely satisfied, whether the belief be true or false. So Cartesian doubt is not how we actually reason. The test is satisfaction. Truth must be proven over time by satisfying or rendering, right, or nullifying the doubt that initiates the inquiry. So the larger picture here that Peirce is describing is what I like to call a matrix of doubt and belief. So you have to imagine that at any given time, most of us have any number of beliefs which are completely settled and fine. Like, I am completely comfortable with the belief that I am sitting in a chair, that the ground that I'm sitting on is stable, that I'm in a room with light and air, right? But if I hear a scratching noise, right, that raises a doubt for me, and I investigate by going and looking around, where's the scratching noise coming from? And I might see that it's a branch or a cat, and then once I figure that out, I go back to where I was sitting, my desk, and I'm content again. So we live in this matrix of beliefs and doubts, and in a state when we're perfectly content, most of our beliefs or all of our beliefs are not right. They're guiding us towards action, or they're just sort of ready to guide us towards action. It's when doubt crops up that we inquire, and we don't raise doubts about every belief that we have. A doubt is raised about some specific belief, like what's that noise, or why won't this door open? Okay, so this is the kind of picture that Peirce wants to establish. There's a web of beliefs with which we're perfectly satisfied most of the time. You might think of William James, or W.V.O. Quine in terms of webs of belief. And when something interrupts or disrupts that web of belief, we have to address it. But it usually doesn't disrupt the entire web, right? We wouldn't be able to operate if it did. So Descartes felt that the disruption of all beliefs was necessary to reach knowledge. Peirce does not think this. So for Peirce, the standard for inquiry is not certainty and truth, but probability. So a belief for Peirce is a more or less secure indication that we've established a habit. We may, on the first try, it may not establish very solidly a habit, but over time it could. We can't ask for more than this, Peirce says. All we have is our experience of no longer being irritated by the doubt that started off the inquiry. So the objective for Peirce is not perfect certainty to resolve the doubt. The objective is to resolve the doubt by reaching a state of belief which creates a habit which can lead to action. Right? This is a fallible and contextual condition for knowledge. It can be proved wrong by future experience, and the amount of security that we will require about our answer to some doubt or some inquiry will depend on the context, right? So if I'm doing an inquiry about what to have for dinner, right, it's a sort of minor problem and the stakes are not that high, and I don't need to do a very deep inquiry into it. But if I'm trying to make a decision about a cancer treatment, what kind of cancer treatment, whether to risk it, and so forth, a much longer, deeper inquiry is going to be necessary, and that will produce a greater level of confidence and a greater amount of security. In Dewey, we'll see this will come up later, but in Dewey he calls this sort of state of doubt, he calls them indeterminate situations. And so we move in Dewey from an indeterminate situation to a problematic situation. We problematize the indeterminacy, we engage in inquiry, and then we wind up in a determinate situation, one which leads to a resolution and action in many cases. So to summarize Peirce's position on inquiry in this beginning part of fixation, there are really three important aspects about Peirce's conception. First, a living doubt has to be the initiation of inquiry, right? Not just the posing of a question, not just the supposition of a hyperbolic doubt. A real and living doubt is what's required for inquiry. Second, premises need to be acceptable, not certain, right? They only need to be free from actual doubt. The idea that this floor is stable, of course, it's not 100% certain, but it's a good premise for many other inquiries and for, of course, the action of continuing to sit here and talk to you. Third, the terminus of inquiry arrives when actual doubt subsides. It is not over when absolute certainty is reached, right? When there is clarity and distinctness, right, in the intuition. No, it's when actual doubt goes away. Okay? Sometimes we say when we're looking into a question, we say, Good enough. Okay, and that's pretty rough and ready for Peirce, who has scientists' standards of what most conclusions should be like, but that is not bad.